Hello, everyone. It has been far too long that we have done a hockey podcast. Last we did a hockey podcast, I was living in Kamloops. I think Tyler was down in Surrey. Sean was still in Calgary, and I'm now back in the Vancouver area, Coquitlam. Tyler, you're back in Terrace?
That's correct. Yeah, we have our first snowfall of the winter today as well.
Oh, congratulations!
Yeah, people are excited.
Yes, and there's 900. Is there 930 feet of snow in Calgary, Sean? Or
not quite, but yeah, we definitely got some snow. I think we're on snowfall number 14.
Yeah. Other things that happened since last week were on. Todd McClellan was coach of the Oilers. Milan Lucic was on the number one line for the Oilers. But now that is all different. And the Canucks did not lose 7 of their last 10 games, but as we are just recording this just after they won 6-1 over the St. Louis Blues, and Elias Pettersson has done it again. He is now we might as well just send him the record book and just put it beside his dressing room, as today he is the first Canuck since Alex McGillney to record multiple 5-point games in a season. I don't know what other adjectives or anything else that there can to be said about Easy E or Ely P or whatever we want to call him, but do we have anything to describe him? Oh, and tonight, actually another big significant point was Brock Boeser got a hat trick today. So maybe we start with what we are seeing or what we saw today and go from there for the last 10 games.
Yeah, well, as well as the acquisition of Levo.
Yes, Josh Levo was not a Vancouver Canuck. He was a Toronto Maple Leaf. William Nylander was in Sweden as well. So touchdown in Toronto, as you know, was well done.
Touchdown and then getting into a car accident.
Yes.
Yeah.
Lots has happened. So, but I think let's start with the Canucks. The 2-7-1 going into the game today. Won their last 2 games. They've scored 5 goals. The last 2 games, they beat Nashville 5-3. They beat St. Louis 6-1. And I don't think St. Louis is a great team, but I have to say, from what I've seen of the Canucks, I know that they're not winning a lot of games, but I don't think that they're playing incredibly terrible. I don't think that it's not from a lack of effort. There's still a number of the issues that we were expecting to be the issues have been the issues, but they're actually, I think, a bit of an improvement. I think goaltending wise, I think Markstrom has been a bit better than I think was expected. The defense is still the defense. Brock Boeser's getting his game together, and as mentioned before, we get into the trade aspect of this, Mr. Elias Pettersson is not only running. I mean, if the Canucks were in a playoff spot, this guy may have a legitimate argument to the Hart Trophy. But right now, this guy is setting the. I don't know what else to say about this guy that has not been said. It's been quite spectacular what this guy is doing, and he's really just making this quite effortless. It is unbelievable what this guy is doing.
Yeah, and the fact that now that Brock Boeser's back and healthy, those two seem to have gotten some chemistry there that just is making it just a nightmare for opposing teams when they're on. And then I think the idea of putting Josh Levo on that line with them has really given them a little bit more room and space to make the plays and make the passes and take the shots, all while playing deeper in the zone, which when they were playing with Nikolai Goldobin, they weren't. They were playing up above the circles, and when that inevitable bad pass from Goldobin would happen, they would be going the opposite way on an odd man rush. That's not happening anymore, and that line's getting more zone time, more opportunities, and they're capitalizing more often than not.
Today's game looked a lot like the last time we spoke when the Canucks had that 7-6 win over Colorado, and Pettersson and Boeser were lighting it up together. The chemistry really is something to watch with those two. Really love the Levo pickup. Canucks benefiting from Toronto's salary cap situation there. They needed to move a guy out to make room for William Nylander, and Levo's getting a bigger opportunity and really running with it so far. I have to agree with all your points there, Sean, as far as sort of how the Canucks are playing right now. Goldobin, I think the coaching staff gave him more than enough opportunity to prove himself playing with Pettersson, and they haven't been getting a lot of wins lately, so they're trying something else, and they've won the last couple games. Looks good right now.
Yeah, maybe let's talk a little bit about what you're seeing specifically from Levo. We'll get to Goldobin in a second, because I think there's a lot more in terms of what to talk about with Goldobin here going forward. And because also Mr. Baertschi is on this trip, and Mr. Baertschi could be playing very well soon. And we have a bit of a log jam, and then you bring in Josh Levo. But what does Levo bring that the Canucks didn't have? What is he bringing? He's
bringing a bit of size, willingness to go into the corners, play that down low cycle, and get the forecheck, get that puck, and get it to Pettersson and Boeser, and he's just creating more space for them. While when they were playing with Goldobin, that wasn't happening. So teams and defensemen were able to take away the time and space from Boeser and Pettersson a little more effectively than they have been since they've put Levo on that line.
Basically, he's a guy with some size that can score, and he's been traded, so he's extra motivated right now, and it's always good to inject one of those types of guys into your lineup, especially at a time when you're struggling and maybe a group that's looking for some help from the outside to come in and give your team a boost, and I think he's done that.
Yeah, I mean, the last two games, as I said, I think the Canucks have, I don't think the Canucks, maybe I'm wrong, but I don't think the Canucks have been necessarily, they haven't been awful. They're not winning, which is not good, but it depends on if you're in for lose for use or whatever, but they're not terrible to watch. They're fun to watch right now. To stick with the forwards a little bit, and because there's a couple that are need to come back. You've got Baertschi on this road trip. You've got Brandon Sutter that's going to be back soon. First of all, let's talk about where is the fit with Goldobin? Like, if you were to put Goldobin on, does he have room on this team? Is he a guy that can be a regular healthy scratch, which he was earlier this month? Or is this a guy that you possibly could look at making a move for to get an asset in return? Whether that be a draft pick, right shot defenseman, or a prospect of some kind.
I think there is a spot for him currently. Right now they've got him playing with Bo Horvat and Jake Virtanen, and that line looks good at times, but they've also been, Travis Green hasn't been hesitant to give Antoine Roussel a look on that line, and they've looked just as good, if not better, with Roussel. But I think long term, as of right now, I think Goldie might be one of the extras that they might look at moving to get an asset like a right shot defenseman or maybe some more prospects and draft picks going forwards, just because, as we said, the Levo, Boeser, Pettersson line's looking really good. And then when Horvat and Virtanen look just as good, if not better, with Roussel on their wing, and that line can be a bit of a you aren't afraid to play that line against the top lines when you've got Roussel on that wing. You might wonder where Goldobin fits, or even if it's not Goldobin, where Baertschi fits when he comes back.
That's a nice little segue there for me, because I think it really does come down to which of the two does the Canucks have more faith in, Goldobin or Baertschi. And Baertschi's been hurt most of the season, so it's really hard to get a handle on where he's at right now. I don't think the Canucks are ready to give up on Goldobin quite yet. It's hard to say what the trade return could be. The Canucks being a West Coast team and not as high on people's radar as some of the Eastern teams, maybe the return would be a little underwhelming. I don't know. I mean, they've already taken the move now of healthy scratching him to see if he'll respond, and it's still a little bit early to assess what effect that's had and whether he's picked it up or not. But obviously, when Baertschi is healthy to play, Goldobin, I think his spot's a little bit at risk right now.
My issue with Goldobin is, despite the fact that he's been driving the play a lot, he is very much prone to just making that bad pass, making that bad play, and letting the opposition go the other way on an odd man rush. He's struggled with just the decision making. He plays too high in the zone to be making those high risk passes at times.
Yeah.
Were you going to say something, Tyler? Or?
Nope. Agree with that.
He's not a bottom six forward in the sense of like what the typical role of a bottom six forward would be, because he's more of an offensive guy. But in terms of what about let's chat a little bit about Adam Gaudette here for a second before we get to the defense. How has he looked? Is there room for him when Sutter comes back, or is he heading back down? Have we seen anything pros or cons for Adam Gaudette so far?
He's looked good. He may not be producing, but too much. But he hasn't looked out of place playing as a fourth line center, and is developing well to a point where maybe Sutter becomes a bit expendable and another trade chip for Jim Benning going forwards.
I would be leaning towards Gaudette going down once Sutter comes back. Sutter's got so much more experience, and I would imagine the Canucks are probably not thinking tank it at this point. I mean, obviously they haven't made any public comments to that effect as to what they're sort of thinking for the season. But no, I think that Gaudette's had a great opportunity here, and he's shown some progress, but could use a little more time in the minors before he gets another shot once that log jam occurs with Sutter coming back.
You know, it is interesting, though, because I was just thinking this. At the trade deadline for playoff run, a guy like Brandon Sutter could be valuable to a team needing a face-off guy, because face-offs are important in the playoffs. There might be an opportunity there to get a little bit more for Brandon Sutter than I think he's probably there. There may be teams that may overpay for Brandon Sutter.
Well, he's versatile, so that was
at the deadline for sure. I think you could definitely get an overpayment for Brandon Sutter at the deadline, especially because he's still got one more year after this season on his deal.
Yeah, Tyler, what were you going to say?
Oh, I was just going to say he's a versatile player as well. He can play center and wing, so that would certainly be attractive to teams looking to add a piece at the deadline.
Yeah, it's interesting because I mean, I don't think we're sitting here. I mean, as of this moment, the The Canucks are about 4 to 6 points out of the final wild card spot, which is held by the Vegas Golden Knights. I don't think it's something that I don't think we're expecting a playoff run. I guess we'll see what happens within the next couple of months. What happens, but I mean, as Sean and I were talking off air, I think something like Goldobin was probably an off-season move, but a Brandon Sutter could be a trade deadline move that would make some sense. I think, if you're going to be moving a guy, it seemed to be there.
Yeah, at the deadline, I see them moving. If the deal's there, Sutter and then Del Zotto as well.
Yeah. Let's get to the defense, and maybe while we're at it, let's talk a little bit about Travis Green, because I think that there's a connection a little bit here. Because not only has Goldobin been scratched the last little bit, Travis Green has also been not afraid to scratch a guy that is probably, I wouldn't say he's in the top 2, but right now the top 4 defenseman, Troy Stetcher. What have you thought about how his handling of scratching players that are kind of a little bit in a higher level on the team? What do you think of him doing that? Is it sending a positive message to his team, and is he establishing that identity? And how have you thought Troy Stetcher has responded to being scratched?
I think I like the move from the coach there, and it's a message to everybody, but that their spot's not guaranteed. You know, with the Sedin's gone now, it's a new identity that they're trying to develop, and you have to be contributing every night to be in the lineup. And sometimes a young player can get a little bit complacent. It's not a conscious decision to take it easy and rest on your laurels, but sometimes you get used to playing every day, and you're feeling like your spot's pretty secure. And if your habits start to slip a little bit, a healthy scratch will certainly wake people up. And I think Stetcher's responded quite well.
And as much as I think Canucks fans aren't happy with the fact that Stetcher got scratched. Stetcher isn't necessarily on a good team. He's not going to be a top 4 defenseman. He's going to be on that bot. He's going to be a good bottom pair defenseman, and that's what. And I think Travis Green realizes this and sees that. So he's not afraid to sort of treat him that way. And as much as we like Troy, and he does give it all, but when he's on the ice now, he's just, like I say, he's just not that your prototypical top 4 defenseman. And if the Canucks can figure out a way to get a better top 4 right hand defenseman, he will be slotted in as their third pair right shot D man going forwards.
Yeah, once they get something a bit better. Let's talk there hasn't been much. I mean, I think there's been more attention to the forwards, obviously, because of the success of Pettersson, the play of Boeser, shotgun Jake. But the defense has been a little bit, the talk around the defense has been a little bit quiet. What have you thought a bit of them? Who's impressing you, and who's been struggling a bit in your mind?
I'd say Pouliot has struggled, and he's sort of fallen off the out of the conversation for next year, while Hutton has stepped up. Because going into next year, you're going to have Hughes and Hugh Levy pushing for spots. Edler may or may not be back, and then you've got Hutton, Pouliot, and also looking for spots. But I think Pouliot's taking a step back, and I don't think unless he can figure things out, I think he's on the outside looking in going forward. Well, Hutton has doing his best to secure himself a spot next year.
Yeah, I would agree that Hutton's had a really strong bounce back season here and has certainly earned more trust from the coach. when the Canucks were going through that long losing skid there, basically, in my mind, one of the biggest issues for the team was just too much of Pouliot and Del Zotto together in the lineup. That was obviously a result of Edler being out. When you play one or the other, I think their defense is somewhat adequate, but the two of them together, yeah, not so much. Del Zotto has more experience, probably would fetch a better return in a trade. So, yeah, it does make you wonder where Pouliot fits long term.
And on the right side, Goodbranson's hasn't been noticeable in bad ways this year too much. So I think he's played his way back into the conversation going forwards. My only concern on the right side is that it's not necessarily very dynamic offensively. So hopefully maybe they're going forwards. They're relying on the fact that they'll have Hugh Levy, and who else on the left side to drive the play up going forwards.
And potentially one of them could be a right side defenseman playing the left. I don't know who that is, but that certainly would seem to be something that they could experiment with. I don't know if Juolevi has played the right side before. I don't know if Quinn Hughes has played the right side before. But that's that possibility as well. But I think probably it's quite likely that you're either going to have to draft that guy or get that guy in a trade of some kind. And they're not necessarily easy to fetch. I think it's right now probably one of the hardest things to find is a right-handed shot defenseman that can play a good 20-25 minutes for you. I think it's hard to find that right now. It seems in the National Hockey League, but for a lot of teams, but it is certainly a weakness that you can see with the Vancouver Canucks as well. I mean, but what about where's Tanev in all of this? Are you expecting Tanev to be there next year? Be here next year, or what do you?
Yeah, I think so.
It's a big question because you look at that right, like I said, you look at that right side, and you've got Tanev, Goodbranson, and Stetcher, and none of them really are. None of them are going to put up the points that you're going to want out of at least one of them if you're going to have for your top four. And you've got Tyler Meyer and Erik Karlsson coming up in UFA. So Jim Benning's got to make a decision on whether or not he's happy with the current makeup of the right side of the blue line, and then see if he can make a trade for. If he's not happy with it, make a trade and see if he can upgrade it.
I think one of the problems for Tanev is his injury history just really is a turnoff for teams that may be interested in him. You know, like he's so solid as a stay-at-home D-man. He's got a lot of years under his belt now, but it's just that reliability factor is always going to hurt the chances at a good trade return if they decide to go that route.
Yeah, it's interesting though, because that's another guy though that I can see at a trade deadline that someone could potentially overpay for because he fits all he fits all those playoff boxes. He's not, he can give you some. He doesn't have to be the number one defenseman. He can give you solid minutes, and if you're in a playoff run, the more D that you have, the easier it is to go. So I don't know. That may be a good trade, another trade deadline shit that the Canucks have going forward to acquire some prospects or some depth in another way.
Seems like forever now that Tanev's been the speculation of trade with the Canucks. So I don't know. That's one of those I'll believe it when I see it type of things.
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
Yeah, I think it's more likely that we'll see Edler get traded than Tanev at this point, just because despite the fact that right side is a bit one-dimensional in the fact that there's no offense in it, there's not the depth there organizationally, because you've got Biega, who he's a good number 7 guy, and then they've got Chatfield and Utica. And outside of that, they don't have anyone in the pro ranks that you could be happy with going forwards with until they make a move in the off season.
What are we? This is a guy I just popped in my head. I wasn't thinking, but I mean, thinking forward here. I mean, Quinn Hughes was kind of in the news a little bit this week because he's blowing it up in Michigan, which nobody is really that surprised. But what about Jet Wu? What are your hopes at this point for him?
I think he looks like a good sort of like another, I think a hybrid between a good Branson and a Tanev but that's like 2, 3, 4 years away.
Yeah.
So they still need to find either a stopgap or even just finding a way to add another player, and add another right shot defenseman to grow with him, because I said Chatfield might be there, but Tanev's getting older. Good Branson that's what you're going to get with good Branson. I don't think you're going to get much more than that. And then Stetcher that's what we're going to get with Stetcher, right? So there's not much outside of Jet Wu. There isn't much hope or just promising future prospects on the right side right now.
I think he's quite a ways away, although his offense lately seems to be grabbing at least a few people's attention. I guess apparently he's up to 22 points now or something like that in 23 WHL games, so he's on a bit of a point streak. But it's so hard to say. He was just drafted. He's a down the road piece for me. I'd like to see how he performs in the AHL before making any solid judgments on him.
Yeah, fair.
And he'll be getting a little more ice time going through Christmas and the New Year here, because one of the top defensemen out of Moose Jaw is going to be on Team Canada at the World Juniors.
Yes.
And Josh Brook.
Yeah, that's coming up, of course, at the end of December here in Vancouver and Victoria, the World Juniors. That's going to be very exciting. Sean brought up the names. So let me ask, and because there's a pros and a cons in this, and we'll probably get into this a little bit later with the signing in Nylander and specifically the term. Is it worth it to take a shot and see taking a shot at an Erik Karlsson or a Tyler Myers? Is that a reasonable thought for Canuck fans to think one of those two guys? Like Erik Karlsson would seem to be almost impossible, but probably less. But a guy like Tyler Myers, is there a reasonable shot, or is it even worth it to look at this? Look at trying to sign them in the off season and get into. I
think it is. Just because, like I said, there isn't any. The right side is a bit stale. Outside of Jet Wu, there really isn't anyone that you can really hang your hat on going forwards, and he is a few years away, anyways. So I think they do need to make a move to bolster that side, and if you have a right side of Tanev, Myers, and good Branson / Stetcher to go along with a bit more of a dynamic left side with Hugh Levy and Hughes, I think that's something that you can build on, because I think going after this season, with the way that now that they found a couple pairings up front that you can build lines around, I think it's time to start looking at building around those players and building it and start building that team instead of continuing to sort of quote unquote tank and continuing to add these and hope that you can get these top 5 picks.
A player like it was Myers you were asking about there?
Karlsson or Myers?
Myers, Myers is a tier of player that's sort of consistent with what the Canucks seem to be aiming for all the time in making deals or free agent signings. Karlsson seems just unrealistic. I don't see how he'd even want to sign with another Canadian team at this point.
my one caution I'm wondering is there has to be probably obviously in negotiation thinking ahead because you still have to sign Boeser and you may need to give Pettersson a raise. I mean, we're not having that conversation yet, but that conversation is going to happen. How much is how much would you pay for it considering all of that?
Well, if he can get Myers in that 5.5 at the very, very low end up until about 7, then you're doing really well, in my opinion.
Yeah. Okay. Because I
think right shot defensemen are tough to find, right? So you're going to have to pay a bit more of a premium than you would for a left shot guy at the same skill level.
Yeah, and the pro that you're at is because I think there is an interesting strategy around what you're doing with signing guys going ahead. But you're still going to have Pettersson and Boeser in a restricted free agent status as of this point. Things can certainly change with the collective bargaining agreement for sure, but at this point, you're doing a restricted free agent, so you have some control over that. But you don't want to put yourself in too much of a chip situation where it can get messy too. That's the other problem.
Yeah,
you also don't want to overpay
now. To make sure that you have enough room to sign. Anything they do with the blue line will have to wait until they have Boeser locked up, anyways, because then you know what they have salary cap wise to work with. And the cap's going up a decent amount, sounds like, anyways. So,
yeah.
I mean, the one thing to always note with the cap going up is that player representation is always looking to get a bigger piece of the pie every time the cap goes up. So, yeah, it is in absolute dollars more money available, but at the same time, the ask always goes up as well.
Yeah, for sure. But I do think, we do think the strategy around that is very interesting. Which is there anything before we get into other stuff going on, which has been a lot because it's been a month? Is there any stories or anything in the Canuck land that he is not getting enough attention that we should give a shout out to?
I think fans need to start paying a little more attention to Jonathan Dahlen. He's starting to heat up. He's starting to figure things out on the North American ice. He's got I think 3 goals in his last 2 games, and starting to look like he's going to push for a spot going forward. So it's going to be that's another player that's going to add to the logjam on the wing. So
yes, for sure.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think Dahlen is a candidate for a call up here at some point, depending on obviously inevitable injuries that may pop up to Canucks forwards. And I think that's, if the owner is receptive to what the fans are saying, the fans are calling for, let's see these young guys, I think that everybody in the organization would be on board with getting him in there when he looks like he's ready.
Yeah. The second half of the season is going to be interesting for that because it's quite likely Dahlen. It's quite possible there's a Quinn Hughes playing. Demko, I think, is an interesting question. I don't know if we'll see him this year with the concussion. That may have been a bit of a setback. But I mean, even we were just talking about the World Juniors. There's an opportunity to see Michael DiPietro. So I think that the fans have an opportunity to see what the prospects are looking like in the future. So I think, go ahead.
Tyler Madden too is someone that might make a Team USA, and he's been lighting it up in the NCAA as well. Yeah.
There's certainly a lot to be excited about if you're a Canucks fan. I mean, we knew it was going to be rough, but I think that I think that this patience.
Well, I mean, you say rough, Kevin. I mean, you could look at the standings and say, okay, well, it's not going very well, but it's like what we talked about earlier. I think most Canuck fans would agree this is a significant improvement in terms of the quality of play, even though they've lost a few close games. It doesn't look that rough on the ice overall. There's some periods of there's some stretches there where they don't very good defensively, or they're missing their opportunities, or they're in the penalty box too much. But that's how it goes with a team that's finding its way.
It's more. I mean, I guess for results parts, I mean, it's not like winning and losing. If you're looking at the record, it's not great. But at the other side of this is they're in the worst division in hockey right now in the NHL. I don't think there's much of a debate about that right at this point in time, I think. And they're only actually 4 to 6 points out of a playoff. So I'm not saying that they're going to maintain that pace, but I don't think that this is not doom. This hasn't been a season of doom and gloom. This isn't what's going on the ice right now as we're recording on Hometown Hockey with the disaster that is the Chicago Blackhawks, or the disaster earlier in the day that is the St. Louis Blues, where I think there was higher expectations. So,
well, just on that note, my feeling about the Canucks game today was if they're serious about making a push for a playoff spot, they have to beat a team like St. Louis. You can't miss opportunities like that. And they made they beat them quite decisively today. So that was an encouraging thing to see. They've done all right against LA this year. They did have back-to-backs there and dropped the one at home, but they were close in that one as well. So as long as the Canucks are collecting points against those weaker teams that they should be getting the points against, I think that they're going to hang in this thing for a while.
And they may, but I don't see them being good enough on the blue line and depth-wise scoring. They've got the top two lines, but outside of that, they don't have the consistent depth scoring in the bottom six to be a legit playoff team, because I think with Edmonton now stepping up, Calgary's looking real good now, and San Jose will still be good. Those are going to be your three teams that get out of the Pacific, and then the rest, you'll get 5 out of the Central. So, maybe the Canucks stay in it a little bit, but they should. I don't think they're going to be in it long enough to be considered a true playoff contender.
They got to figure out their third period play if they're going to be able to do this. One of the things I was looking to see today was, would they keep the foot on the gas pedal in the third period? Well, they gave up 1 goal in the third period and came right back and restored the 5-goal lead. So that was encouraging to see. Whereas in the Nashville game, they sat back a little bit and gave up a couple in the third period, and Nashville was suddenly back in the game. So, and then the third period's cost them a number of games where they should have at least collected a point. So that's a big thing, and I think it speaks to what you talk about there, Sean, with their depth at forward and the quality of their defense. When the opposition starts to push, the weaknesses start to show more.
Yeah, and that's going to happen with a team that's growing, right? This is a team that's they're not there, but they're growing, and that's how you learn, is sometimes you learn through the tough stuff. But
it's in terms of the fan base seems to be split on team tank and sort of team playoffs. I think that we need to split the difference and just call it team development.
Yeah.
You got to look for development this season, wherever they finish. But as long as you're seeing development from the players like Pettersson, Boeser, Horvat, and more importantly the Virtanens, the Goldobins, and as well as everyone else throughout the organization, the Dollins and the junior players, that's what we want to see.
Yeah.
Not necessarily results based, good or bad.
Yeah, I think since getting Hughes last year, Pettersson before that, getting Jonathan Dowland in the Alex Burrows trade. I think there's more in the system for people to look at and say, okay, tanking is really not so crucial anymore. And besides, I feel like a broken record when I talk about how tanking doesn't guarantee you anything in the draft lottery. You still have to do your homework and do the best you can with the pick you get. And the Canucks can still do that even if they're drafting, say, 11th, 12th, 13th.
Yeah, I posted this just before when the whole McLellan-Hitchcock transition happened. We'll get into this a little bit, but if you look at the draft history compared to the Edmonton Oilers and the Vancouver Canucks, there's only been once in the last 8 years that the Canucks have actually drafted ahead of the Oilers. And you look at those what has come out of all of that. The draft, especially later on, the Canucks are actually not doing that. In comparison, the first pick doesn't guarantee you anything. It gets maybe guarantee you that you have the potential to get the ultimate franchise player of that year, but you can still build Elias Pettersson was not a first pick, they didn't get Rasmus Dahlin, but Quinn Hughes was probably a steal in a lot of ways, and there's some rough patches, but overall, I don't think that you can't complain too much about the Canucks draft history the last few seasons.
No, they drafted Brock Boeser 23rd overall.
Yeah, they've had a few hiccups in the drafting since Benning took over, but overall it's been more good than bad. And the last few seasons, since they've given Judd Brackett a little more leeway and a little more control over the drafting, it's looked really good.
Yeah, and you look at even the first. The first picks of the Oilers compared to the first picks of the Canucks, I would take that list. I'll take that Canucks list over that Oilers list, even if they have Connor McDavid. Well, comparison overall, I don't think that they've done that bad. Let's move on to the Oilers here for a second, shall we? Because we are as of this point, about an hour and a half or so away from probably the biggest game of this night, which if you're hearing this after the game, we don't know the result, but the Edmonton Oilers the last time played the Calgary Flames. Matthew Tkachuk caught a ruckus. Zach Kassian took about 342 minutes of penalties. Milan Lucic ended up on the top line. At the end of the game, the Flames won. Todd McLellan got fired. Ken Hitchcock has taken over. The Oilers have appeared to have turned this around a little bit, in theory. What did you think of the change? And in terms of the game tonight, or from the Oilers' perspective, where are the Oilers right now in your mind? Are they in good shape? Are they in bad shape? Are they? We still need to wait and see.
I don't think they're in much different shape than before, even though they made the coaching change. I think I'm surprised it didn't happen sooner. I guess probably the organization felt that they've made so many coaching changes, they had to give McLellan as much time as possible. I will say this, though, as far as people out there that they could have gotten, Ken Hitchcock's not a bad choice. He'll certainly comes in with with a pretty good resume and can command some respect with that team and try to get them to play a little better defensively. But they have what they have. There's still a lot of pieces there that are underachieving for how much they're paid. And it really limits the manager's ability to make changes. And, so I don't know. I don't see Edmonton as a playoff team. I see them as a team that's maybe, fixing a few of their deficiencies just with a different voice in the head coaching position. But they've got a ways to go. Unless their goaltending can give them like it was a couple of years ago when they made the playoffs, then, that's not much of a team there.
Yeah, I think the addition of Hitchcock for this season, I think maybe a good add, but going forwards past it might be a bit more of a problem. But so far they've looked good under him. They've played a good, more possession style game, and they've been able to quell the goals against issue a little bit more. So, and he's got better lineups and better lines that give McDavid more to play with, which is the key to the Oilers' success.
It is going to be interesting going forward because they've went through so many coaches, and it's not, from all reports indicated right now, Ken Hitchcock is not expected to come back next season, so they're going to they may end up needing another coach. I think it feels like a Mike Keenan hire. Like he's come in a sense to be a Keenan, to really put some light a fire under some players' butts, make sure that they're turning in the right direction, and probably will help in the short term. But long term, I don't know I still don't know where the Oilers are. I mean, I know that there's a lot of hope around a guy like Koskinen, who potentially could be your number one goalie going forward. There's still some holes on that defense. They're playing a better game, but I still don't see from the bottom six. And we'll talk about the Flames in a second and one of my concerns. But the bottom six, there's still a lot of concern in Oilerland that I don't, possible playoff run, but do I see them getting past the first round match if they're matching up on a Nashville or a Calgary or a Colorado? I don't see it, but I don't know.
One of the things you didn't raise there was whether they're going to need a new general manager next year. And if they don't make the playoffs this year, I think that's it.
Well, even if they get a GM, or even if they make the playoffs, I don't know if you're bringing back Chiarelli next year.
Yeah, this definitely is a make or break season for the current iteration of the Oilers front office. Chiarelli's made so many questionable moves, and you're wasting some of the best years of one of the best players in hockey history. So
yeah. I mean, and not to put it all on Chiarelli, because it makes you wonder how much direction he's getting from above, including ownership. But there's been more bad moves than good ones, for sure.
Well, even Strome getting out of Edmonton, he seems to be playing much better with the Rangers. The other part of it, what I'm also noticing that is the players that are leaving Edmonton, like Taylor Hall, prospered more playing in New Jersey, even though there was this, at the time, although people pretty much thought that wasn't a great trade, they thought that Taylor Hall was going to hell. Taylor Hall has prospered. Strome prospered. The players that seem to be leaving the Oiler organization are actually playing a lot better than they were in the Oiler organization, which maybe is a question around, which leads to a bunch of other questions of what's possibly going on in Edmonton. But
if you have a losing culture, I think that just really beats down certain players' confidence. And the Canucks have, emphasized over and over, we want to build a winning culture. So what you end up getting is something in between a tank and a playoff team. But you look at the Canucks now with a lot of their younger players, in particular Bo Horvat and Brock Boeser. They seem to continue to develop confidence, continue to progress, and that just doesn't seem to happen very much in Edmonton.
The Oilers' top prospects outside of McDavid have really stagnated, and they haven't really been able to grow. You look at Jesse Puljujarvi and even a little bit Kyle Yamamoto. They haven't really been able to step up and become NHL players and produce at a level that is acceptable for a top pick. So that is I think the biggest question mark going forwards with the Oilers is player development.
Yeah, and I mean, if you look at the Calgary Flames, I mean, they've been in and out of the playoffs. I use the term spinning their wheels a little bit, but I think you can say with all their younger players that they continue to improve and continue to gain more confidence. Your Goudreaus and Monahans and your Matthew Tkachuk's, those players. I mean, I think you can look at the Flames and say that they are mostly moving forward, even if there's the odd hiccup here where they get into a losing skid or they have a season where they fall short of the playoffs or whatever. I don't think that we should be looking at it and saying that they're not progressing. They are, just maybe not as quickly as people would like, but they are progressing. And now you're looking at them and saying, boy, I mean, they beat Nashville last night and looked awesome. They were filling the net, and that was without Mark Giordano playing.
Yeah. I mean, I think the one thing that the Flames from 2014 was not a good draft. I mean, that was a really terrible draft for the Flames. But the last 3 seasons, even though they ended up last year without that first round pick, that turned out to be a lottery pick. They actually have done, I mean, you end up with an Oliver Shillington, pronounced with a K, and you end up with a Rasmus Anderson. You end up drafting some guys. I mean, Mark Jankowski took forever to develop, and was a very questionable pick at the time, but he's come along. Their drafting has been pretty good the last few seasons. David Rittich is giving them solid goaltending. My big concern with the Flames going forward, and I think it's great that they're in this position. I think Bill Peters has done a really good job. I think Jeff Ward has done a really good job. I think the coaching staff has been great. I think Elias Lindholm has been an absolute find for the Flames. My biggest concern going forward is still the concern that was a little bit with the Flames. They are too top-heavy in scoring. It's still Monahan, Gaudreau, Lindholm, Tkachuk. They need James Neal to start producing. He's got 3. I mean, I'm being a little bit more patient than everyone else. It was great last night that guys like Alan Quine and Mark Jankow or Garden Hathaway and they scored. Those things need to keep happening, but they may be a little bit too top heavy going forward to when you're facing a Nashville in a 7-game series with a healthy Turris, Forsberg, and Arvidsson in that lineup, facing some of those teams, that's where I'm mostly concerned about with the Flames. And the goaltending.
Yeah, I think they do have a good glutton of energy bottom 6 players, but they're missing that. They are kind of missing that second tier of scoring, and having Backlund out long term now. That's not going to help. Yeah, they definitely need a Sam Bennett or Mark J up here over the next little bit for them to be able to continue on with this streak they're on.
Yeah, and then it comes.
Well, they need that goaltending to hold up too. Mike Smith's starting to get it going again. It seems to have the net back, but the question for me is how long can that last? The inconsistency in goaltending would still make me nervous a little bit.
It is for me too. But I'm getting a bit more confident in David Rittich. That if Smith falls, then I think Rittich can hold his own. I think. It's not Smith or die. I think Rittich it's going to be okay. And he can come in, if needed, cold. But the other story that's coming out with this Flames-Oilers game, and it's kind of in the theme, we've seen this a little bit this season. A guy hits a player. An example, I'll go back a month or so. A Florida Panther player hits an Oiler player. Milan Lucic skates across the ice, pretty much across the state of Florida to find this guy to get him. We have the Zach Cathy and Matthew Tkachuk incident last time when Tkachuk went after McDavid, wherever you take. The point, Zach Hyman last night had to get into a fight with someone after his hit with Charlie McAvoy on Saturday night against the Bruins. And tonight, Anthony Peluso was called up specifically for this game. We've kind of chatted about this before. Is this? What do you think about this responding tit for tat? Is it getting a little too old school? Is it making sense? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think right now we're in a bit of a transitional period with this, right? I mean, like in the old days, every team had one or two guys, and it was their job to be out there to protect. If they scored, it was just bonus. But their job was to be out there and enforce and protect and be a presence. And now teams just can't afford to have that kind of guy in their lineup. So you have a bunch of guys that are kind of looking around at each other, wondering who's going to provide that. And sometimes you get these situations where, like the other night when Detroit was playing Toronto and there was the hit on Matthews and no response. Well, it's because the guys playing are not. They didn't grow up being those, message send type players. I think everybody still believes in you got to stick up for each other and pull together as a team, but it doesn't come as naturally anymore. It seems like.
It's tough too because I think there's a confusion in the probably with the players on what's a dirty hit, what's not, and what's going to get supplementary discipline versus what isn't. Because today Zach Hyman got suspended 2 games for his hit on Charlie McAvoy, and what Boston did was they went after Hyman afterwards, and then they started running Toronto players. That's actually probably more what you're going to see going forwards instead of going after the player immediately, depending on what the hit is. I think you're going to start seeing the teams start, if they've got the players, start going tit for tat and start going after top players as well. Because you saw, was it Chris Wagner go after Morgan Riley with a big hit?
Yeah. Yep.
And even the Flames Wild game on Thursday after the Dumba hit, which some thought was suspendable, some did not. There was a lot of question about that. I think certainly more question about that. I mean, the Hyman hit was a bit more questionable in my mind than the Dumba hit, in my opinion. But I mean, that Dumba hit could have been a suspension for sure. Then you had Ryan Longberg come out and go after him, and then Gio Giordano hits Koivu. That was earlier in the game, and with the knee hit, and rightfully got suspended for it. Even, I mean, if Giordano is not going to argue about the suspension, then maybe we shouldn't either, I guess. But it is part of the problem. Not that it can be black and white, but it's not always clear what is going to get a suspension or not.
Yeah, and it's a great point to bring up because, if you're expecting a third line or fourth line forward or a third pair D-man to be one of those guys that gets in there and answers the bell and sticks up for teammates physically when it's deemed required. If you're one of those guys and you end up being suspended and forfeit salary, I mean, it's not. Everybody's loath to forfeit salary, but if you're a player that doesn't have a secure spot on the team, you're worried about losing your spot when you're out being suspended.
Yeah.
So it's a real conundrum. The inconsistency, when we've talked about this on this podcast before, the inconsistency in supplementary discipline really makes this messy. You're just not sure what's going to happen if you decide to go down that path.
I don't understand how Ryan Reeves didn't get any games for his hit on Tom Wilson.
That's true.
Well, I don't think anybody does. I mean, the only thing that I think that could be said about that is that Tom Wilson. I can't remember the player that he hit from the blind side in a game a couple days earlier. He didn't get suspended for that play, so the league's kind of in a bind now. They're like, well, how can we suspend Reeves? We just didn't suspend Tom Wilson. There's just no solid standard that's applied uniformly to any of these types of things. I mean, the Reeves thing, was clearly intended. There's no doubting that he clearly intended to make a big hit on Tom Wilson there.
Yeah, and I mean, part of me wonders if he hit anyone else other than Tom Wilson, would that have been a suspension? There's a part of me that wonders that.
Yeah,
Tom Wilson is
and you just don't get an explanation.
Yeah, and that makes it tough too, because it's a bit too and I don't know how to make it consistent, because I'm not one that's going to say a body check should be suspendable, because I'm afraid that we're going down that route, but I don't like the Cronwell hit that was on last night. I don't think that's a suspendable hit. That's a good hit, but there's the Hyman one there's other ones that are certainly questionable for sure.
Yeah, and I mean, when they do suspend, the player safety department often does put out an explanation, and it's fairly technical and it's plausible. But what they don't tell you is how they feel about a certain player politically. You just never get that, and I think that definitely plays a factor in these decisions.
Yeah, I think so too, a little bit. The other big story that happened, we did talk a lot about William Nylander. He did end up signing the deadline. He signed his contract, gets into a car accident, flies to Toronto. It's the whole controversy. The couple of questions that I still do have. Do you think that they did the least overpay? And the second question going forward that I am thinking about is, you're thinking about Boeser, you think about Hitchcock, you think about Pettersson, you think about what's coming up here in terms of Pettersson's not a restricted free agent, but how is this going to impact signing going forward? What are your concerns with this? And from a Leafs perspective, there, I think that it's such an interesting question of whether or not you pay this much for a restricted free agent when you have guys that you're paying. You still need to pay Marner, and I'm sorry, I will be paying Marner way more than Nylander, 100 times out of 100. Myself, no question about it. But what do you see going forward here with this contract?
I see. Well, the thing with restricted free agents is that you're paying for potential more than actual results more often than not. And does Nylander have the skill to make it worthwhile on this deal? Yes. Whether or not he realizes that potential is another thing. If you look at on the Canucks side, you had Bo Horvat. There was a lot of fans and media who thought that the Canucks overpaid for Bo Horvat when he signed his extension. And right now, that's looking like a steal of a deal. So it's really tough to really say whether they overpaid at this point because of the potential aspect of these contracts. And yes, it is going to have an effect on the values of the Brock Boeser, the Matthew Tkachuk deals going forwards, because that's now the benchmark.
But, the one difference that I do think here with the Horvat and Nylander situation is Boeser wasn't that star yet at this point, where the Leafs still need to sign Marner, Matthews, and Gardner to pretty lucrative deals. If they're going to want to contend for a lengthy period of time, you need to get at least those. You need to have those three under contract. Maybe Matthews is a little bit overrated considering the Toronto market, but he's still a guy that I would love to have on my team. I would not dispute that. Marner, I'm a big fan of, and I don't mind Jake Gardner. I like Jake Gardner, and those are guys you do need to sign. That's the
if you want my opinion on Matthews, I think that Matthews should be paid at least the same amount as John Tavares, if not closer to McDavid level of salary. I mean, Matthews missed a bunch of time with injury, comes right back in and picks up where he left off. I mean, the pace he's on is amazing, and he keeps getting better. We'll see how it goes here the rest of the season, but he's near the top of the list of my Hart Trophy candidates at this point.
Yeah, I think going into the season, you could have made the argument that Matthews was a little overrated based off of him being in Toronto. But the way he's playing this year, it's you can't really say that. He's definitely worth what the amount of coverage that he's getting. He's playing out of his mind. He's really good this year.
Yeah, I'm not disputing. Yeah, I'm not disputing that at all. I mean, hey, he was even on. He was on. You got Moss this morning. I mean, like, the guy. Yeah, the guy. No, the guy's absolutely legitimate. But it is like the big problem is spending. Is you have 4 guys with real legitimate talent that you have to spend that you're going to spend a lot of money on that could impact the rest of your team in terms of quality. That's the question and the debate going forward. And I don't know.
Well, one thing that I'm interested to see in terms of fallout from the Nylander thing is what other restricted free agents are going to take this route in the future. You know, I mean, it had never really happened before where an RFA gets to the deadline and you know, finally a deal is made. I would say that Nylander got a better deal than he probably could have by holding out as long as he did. At the same time, it's still within the realm of workable for the Maple Leafs, so they got a fairly good deal there for both sides. Just too bad that they missed so much action from Nylander, and now he's trying to get into form mid-season, and they've lost their first 2 games with him playing. Not blaming it on him, but it's just like he's jumping in, mid-season here, and not surprisingly having a little trouble getting up to speed. But it would have been just an absolute disaster for Toronto if the deadline passed and they weren't able to trade him, and they had this useless asset. That was the scenario that couldn't occur, and I think both sides understood that.
Yeah. Do you see a team going after and trying to match a restricted free agent?
I don't think so.
Like even a Matthews?
I think Matthews is a special case. If he gets to the point where he's they haven't signed him by July 1st, I think someone makes a play for him. But it's so tough to the amount of money you have to spend and offer up for an offer sheet these days to make it worthwhile for these teams to give up to give that player up and take the picks is pretty astronomical. So right now I think Matthews would be a special case that he'd be the only one that would warrant that right now.
Yeah, that is the thing, right? Not only do you have to throw out a big number there to get the team that has the rights to give in and not match, but then you have to give up prospects too, right?
Yeah,
picks. So it's I think that's what makes this. I mean, that's why I think we've seen over time it doesn't happen very often. It's just it's a big risk to do.
Yeah, but it's certainly going to be it's going to be interesting going forward to see what these contracts are and how you play, how really teams play them. Because I mean,
well, I'm sure there's owners out there that are bugging their management team to say, let's make a play on this guy. Let's make a play on this guy. I mean, we've heard this. The late Mike Ilitch, we've heard Ken Holland talk about how Mr. Ilitch wanted to sign everybody. So certainly I think owners are always interested in seeing what the possibilities are, but it's easier said than done.
Yeah, I think so. But in terms of even signing what the contracts are, I mean, to me, Matthew Tkachuk is probably, I think that's a guy that you have to do your 7-8 years to. Brock Boeser is probably a guy that you need to do that to. But there's other guys, I mean, I think that there's going to be some interesting questions going forward about that.
Yeah.
So, going to be interesting. Is there anything else we did not cover that we do need to cover?
Welcome to the NHL, Seattle.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Although I'm a little upset that this is in 3 seasons. I'm not going to lie. I wish that this was in 2 seasons, but that's 3 seasons. That's the way that it is. If you were to give a nickname to Seattle, have you decided on what the nickname for Seattle should be?
I like the Kraken.
Release the Kraken.
What was the was the Metropolitans was the name of the team that they had there way back when?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm kind of feeling like that name probably has the inside track, but I don't have a good enough feel for Seattle to really know what it's going to be. I think it'll come down to one of those two, most likely.
Then we'll have to rename the Metropolitan Division.
Yes.
Yeah, well, that's a good point too. I wonder if the league has a preference on that.
Yeah, that's it. I mean, it's great. That's great for the Vancouver community because it is finally a natural rivalry between two cities in the NHL. Yes, it's in MLS, but it's going to be a bit different in terms of hockey, and I think it'll be a lot of fun.
Yeah, it should be fun. It'd be great, obviously, for hockey-related revenue to have a team in an unserved television market. It's just that gaping hole right now where there's no local team to make a TV deal. I mean, it is a bit of a marginal point to make, but for the Canucks, who have always had grueling travel, it certainly would be nice to have a couple of games there against a team that's really close, as opposed to some other team further away. So I think it makes a lot of sense for the Canucks. It makes a lot of sense for the league. The fans. I mean, I there's no doubt about that. I mean, you'll see the fans travel very well to invade the other team's building when the two teams play. It should be a lot like Minnesota and Winnipeg, I think, in terms of the feel of a rivalry there. It's close and cross border. As far as the delay in the first year of the Seattle team coming in, I mean, it is what it is. I mean, Key Arena, they're basically gutting the thing and starting over. So it was pretty unrealistic to make that happen in a couple of years.
That and I believe in 2 years is when the both out clauses for the CBA are. So I don't think the NHL wanted to potentially have an expansion team start in what could be another lockout.
Yeah, that's true as well, for sure. I was just sad because I'm looking forward to it, and I think Seattle will be a really good hockey town. I know there's some people suspicious about it, but I think that they'll do really well. This is a community that basically, I mean, football is number one, and football will remain number one as long as the Seahawks are relevant. But this is a team this is a city that did lose, sadly, their NBA franchise. I think they're going to support it. And there's a lot of Canadians that will support that Seattle team too. And I think it's. I mean, we didn't get into this, but the Canucks home schedule this year is that is brutal. That at one point they had 4 home games and 18 road games, and it is a little tough here in terms of the schedule. I do think Seattle has that, and I think when or if Portland comes in, that helps as well. Do you think Quebec City is ever going to get a team?
They'll get a relocation.
Relocation,
I think, more than expansion. I think you're looking at Arizona moving to Kansas City or Houston eventually, and then Florida and Carolina are both relocation candidates going up to Quebec.
Yeah, I can see that.
I mean, I hate to say it for Ottawa, but if things get worse there and they can't come up with a downtown arena deal, and Eugene Melnyk suddenly loses interest in owning the team, I mean, I know that none of that's being talked about now, but that's always one to consider for Quebec City as well. I mean, it seems very unlikely, but you never know.
I don't think that they want to. I mean, there's still Calgary is. I mean, Calgary's. I don't see it at this point, but there have been some people with rumors suggesting that Calgary is looking to move. I don't know if that's true or not. But Ottawa to Quebec City, that's an interesting move because it's That's basically a 2.5 hour drive. But
yeah, well, I just with Calgary, I mean, it's a large enough market with a lot of wealth in the market and interested ownership that I don't ever see them leaving. The issue there obviously is the arena, but I think with Ottawa, it's both the arena and you never really know with the current ownership.
Yeah, that's true.
And it's a small market. You know, it's tough. You're surrounded by the Habs fan base and the Maple Leafs fan base, and those populations. You're wedged in between, trying to carve out a market for fans in Ottawa there. And that would be a challenge as well in Quebec City, certainly, but at least they're a place close by that the NHL could always turn to if they really had to.
Yeah. Well, the Canadians have not won a cup since Quebec moved, so it might help them. I'm just saying. No. Yeah, that'll be interesting. All right, let's leave it there. It was good to be back in the podcasting world. Where do we follow you guys? We will be back. We'll plan for next week. We'll be more weekly than we have been. I was moving, so resettling in the fine line of Vancouver. So, where do we follow you guys?
Beauty Canucks 03 on Twitter.
And I'm on Twitter at TNoble, TNOBLE.
Okay, and of course you can follow me, KVULE, Spreaker.com, KVULE. Like, agree, or disagree the podcast, YouTube, etc., etc. Thanks, guys, for coming on, and thanks, everyone, for listening, and we will talk to you all very soon. Bye for now.